Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Here's an indie gem you probably haven't heard of. Super Mario Bros. Is a 1985 video game developed by Nintendo R&D 4. It can be hard to find the exact site of revolutions in art. We can say that music recording is a big milestone, then overdubbing, but you can't really go back to a single album where the switch flipped between nascent technology and complete dominance. People still play shows and do live-style recordings. But in games, it's obviously Super Mario Bros. In the West, its release settled the whole question of video games. We're going to keep making these, and they will be played on a box in your house. A good chunk of Super Mario Bros. Has entered our cultural memory. The game's opening level is the de facto standard for platformer tutorials, and if you've ever played a shady platformer from the Google Play Store, it probably plagiarized 1-1, if not the entire game. Even if you haven't, pretty granular pieces of design like these block structures and the progressive overload tutorial pattern are ubiquitous and always evoke the original SMB. There's not a ton of unique content in the first Mario game. In fact, several levels are just copies of earlier ones with extra enemies, but these tutorialization patterns appear over and over. This sort of design keeps players from being overwhelmed by new stuff, but even on the scale of a single level, it gives the game a definite arc in difficulty. A major change in side-scrolling platformers, compared to the earlier Mario Bros. Or Donkey Kong, is that you can make a level full of these discrete challenges, but the player can move smoothly between them. They're woven together and allowed to be more than the sum of their parts. Suddenly, Mario is going on a journey through worlds, and the only limit on our pace of play is a generous timer. Miyamoto did not invent moving to the right. We have Defender to thank for that. But leading up to Super Mario Bros., scrolling games moved from shmups, where you essentially move a box at a set speed in 2D, to scrolling car games that integrated jumping physics, to something like Kung Fu Master, which tries some deeper movement stuff but ends up awkward. Super Mario nailed character movement. In Donkey Kong and Mario Bros., you can practically see the character change state as he moves around. It's very discreet. Jumps are short and lack air control. In Mario Bros., you have to be moving to jump left or right, and there's a conflict between the tight space of the level and our need for momentum. This is good game design. Donkey Kong's a fun game, but it's closer to Castlevania than Super Mario. Mario Bros., even though it predates SMB by 2 years, is still interested in the physics of movement. The slide to a stop state is an important innovation. I don't like how rigid the early Mario games are, but when Nintendo has updated the movement of these games, they're sort of trivialized. In a way, I prefer the Game Boy Advance version of Mario Bros., but they loosened the movement when they translated it to GBA. It's fun, but the rigidity of the arcade version clicks nicely with that humble, single-screen game concept. If you have a character that feels like Super Mario, he belongs in a Super Mario game, not this arcade thing. Mario wants to run. Pac-Land is a closer predecessor to SMB1, but the tight timer makes it difficult to have fun with the movement. And Pac-Man can instantly accelerate to full speed, which removes a lot of the complexity we'll see in SMB. All the momentum appears when you try to stop or change direction, which usually turns movement into a flat execution challenge, whereas Mario is built to let you adapt to threats. Pac-Land does give you some air control, but the game's level design is all about jumping at the right time. Pac-Land and Super Mario Bros. Are superficially similar, but you can tell that one is an arcade game and the other heralded the home console future. While Super Mario Bros. Is a progression on older Mario games, at the same time the will to scroll the screen demands a lot more speed and adaptability than a one-screen game would want or need. Anytime I try to describe the movement in this game, I get distracted and play through a world or two, so we can start with Irresistible. Mario's top speed is high enough to make obstacles exciting, but low enough that anyone can make an unbroken run through a level with a bit of practice. SMB1 is my go-to for innately fun character movement, and it's enjoyable to simply run right and scroll the screen. Mario's legs move cartoonishly fast, and the background graphics are varied enough to create a sense of speed and progress. The movement, minus any external challenge, is a toy, and if Miyamoto is owed any special credit over the other people who worked on the game, it's because he prioritizes making this toy fun to play with, and uses that as a springboard to making the game. To that end, we get the first moments of Super Mario Bros., where this Goomba demands that you learn about jumping. Air control is the key to Mario's movement. It must be incredibly finicky to design a system that rides this line between commitment and adjustability, but I think they did it. In the most extreme case, you can stop a jump right around its apex by holding back, but you'll usually want small adjustments just to stick each landing. The margin on jumps can be fairly small in later levels, so it's often too late to recover by the time you realize a jump is bad. This provides some stakes and gives us a challenge to overcome, even though we get a lot of control. Absent these pits and precise geometry, jumping would be strictly better than running. Your speed is also preserved when you land, so landing on a one-block column forces you to decide between trying to get the next jump out immediately or slowing way down. In another word, the movement is smooth. There's an instant of friction when you start moving, to remind you that you shouldn't stop, and it's intensely satisfying to string entire levels together at full speed. That's not really what SMB speedruns are at this point, but I have to imagine that was probably the impetus for them. I've seen a lot of people say SMB1's physics are outdated, but one of the best things about the game is that you do have to get acquainted with the movement. It's a platformer after all. The game is about moving around. Snappy, intuitive movement is the rule in later Mario games, but that approach has its limits. As the 2D series has progressed, it's become more and more reliant on gimmicks and level design, while the first game is both very simple and very replayable. I can't say the later games are bad, but once you've seen Mario Wonder's bag of tricks, it's hard to justify playing it again. If you go into SMB1 expecting to play it once and get the full experience, you're gonna miss out on a lot of the fun. The game's sense of speed isn't just served up on a silver platter. Mario's level design can seem a bit crude and awkward, especially later on, but it's telling you how to approach the game. Pipes are essentially big vertical walls, which you can slowly jump up to, or elegantly skip across, like a 33rd degree plumber. Failing your line and bonking on a wall doesn't kill you, but it brings Mario to a stop. Accelerating from a stop puts a delay between the player and their desired speed, which is slightly frustrating and incentivizes playing well. Beyond the obvious failure state of death, the game quietly pushes you toward playing quickly as your knowledge improves. The closest parallel would be a driving sim, where executing poorly loses you speed and position, but doesn't necessarily crash the car. In SMB there are gradations of speed loss, but I always experience it as a binary. I don't mind sacrificing a bit of speed to get a clean landing, but hitting a wall feels like a failure. I think this constant, low-stakes challenge of maintaining speed makes the game's mundane moments and levels fun. Running freely is coded as a reward, and that keeps the time spent in between challenges engaging. Add to that the reward of scrolling the screen, our indicator of progress, and you have a consistently satisfying game regardless of any other content. Again, more than the sum of its parts. With that said, you won't always want to go fast. Each world's fourth level is a castle. These have low ceilings and they're dense with environmental hazards. There are lots of other spots I prefer to navigate a bit more slowly too. The game's pretty open-ended, so if you want to go for a nice walk through the Mushroom Kingdom, you absolutely can. In these moments where you need to navigate vertically or move below running speed for whatever reason, the game's friction becomes an engaging challenge instead of a limit. Mario passes through a whole bunch of different speeds as he accelerates and decelerates, and each of these slightly changes his jumping and air behavior. As you master the game, the system allows for some incredibly graceful and impressive-looking movements. SMB is not a precision platformer, but managing your momentum is always a concern, so playing well is an expression of skill, and I feel like I've earned it whenever I pull off some weird-looking jump like this. SMB1 is built to play as smoothly as possible. You'll notice the slippery collision on this block, and Mario's entire hitbox can stomp enemies as long as he's moving downward. The game contains 0 bullshit deaths, which is kind of impressive by today's standards, and revolutionary at a time when home games were still copying the arcades. The fun movement brings me to one of the game's many glitches, fast acceleration. You accelerate more quickly if Mario is facing away from your movement direction, but I mostly do it because I think it looks cool. These changes in direction also help visualize how many tiny adjustments I make while playing this game. Despite being very simple by modern standards, SMB1 is always mechanically engaging. The game's skill ceiling has been destroyed by a host of unintended mechanics, like clips and wall jumps, which break it wide open in a speedrunning context, but famously resulted in the minus world glitch. where you enter a warp pipe with a broken destination and play a level made from some random code. There's a great article by Nathan Altus on Gamasutra, RIP, discussing the bulletproof engine behavior that makes -1 an actually playable level. We've lost a lot as games grow more complicated, and SMB1's unintended behavior is an offshoot of its fantastic, hardware-limited design. You'll notice it doesn't instantly crash anytime you break the rules. Glitches or exploits like the minus world, or even clipping through walls, really add longevity to games. The dupe glitches in Dark and Demon Souls are something I always take advantage of, as well as the stairs that skip all of Anne Orlando. Competitive games with long lifespans are also carried by unintended behavior. I'm thinking of Melee, but my beloved AoE 2 has its share as well. So what are we running and jumping into? Mario sets itself apart from previous platformers with its frequent secrets, around 1 or 2 per level for the whole run. These are another incentive to replay the game, and since SMB1 is pretty hard, the hidden coins, power-ups, and extra lives can come in handy. And they give score if you care about one of the only mechanics Mario inherited from the arcades. You can get your high score on the title screen. No initials though. Secrets are not an obvious inclusion for a platformer, but before games were 100 hours long, secrets were essential for replayability. Looking for and finding new hidden tools in the world can make a level you've played many times feel fresh, and they beg the question of other secrets waiting to be found. Before glitches were popularly understood, people thought the minus world was an intentionally hidden level, partially because SMB1 has so many secrets. The secrets served the exact same function they do in, for example, a Souls game. They convinced people the game was bigger than it actually is. Mario's enemies each test some combination of timing, reflexes, and jumping ability. The Goomba is a very simple jumping challenge, and they're quickly relegated to the role of meat shield, forcing you to account for the small bounce after you stomp the Goomba. I think this is why they usually come in pairs. Koopas are similar, but retreat into their kickable shells that can bounce off obstacles and damage you. The flying variation takes 2 hits, but when you knock their wings off, they begin moving in your direction, meaning you have to use some air control to land on them a second time, or try to clear them by a few blocks. Piranha plants complete the classic trifecta, and they take on a few roles. Sometimes the challenge will be timing jumps to avoid them, but you can often jump clear over them too. If Mario's touching their home pipe, the plant won't come out, but waiting for them to hide is so slow I think it counts as another soft failure. Underwater there are fish and bloopers, who have some rudimentary AI. Variety is welcome, but I think the underwater movement is a bit slow in comparison to the grounded levels. Water does have a unique challenge with stilted vertical movement and its general floatiness, but they didn't find a way to make platforming interesting, so the underwater segments just feel like swimming past a bunch of stuff. The short water section in 8-4 is probably my favorite. I think using these mechanics to avoid static threats is less frustrating than the bloopers' randomness. My knowledge of enemy names is running out, but these spiked turtles are unstoppable and thrown onto the playfield by Lakitu, which makes for a few memorable levels. Black-shelled turtles are immune to the fire flower, and fire ropes and fireballs are both timing challenges that harmonize with Bowser's fire breath. Fire, fire, fire. The latter 3 exclusively show up in castles, again pushing you to slow down and consider your moves ahead of time. Further into the game, there are cannons that fire bullet bills at random intervals. They turn a whole row of the screen into a danger zone, and the risk escalates as you approach the cannon. Finally, there are the dreaded Hammer Brothers, equipped with a highly random lag switch in the form of their hammers. They're usually avoidable until 8-3, where you have to face them directly. I have no idea what the intended strategy is. Sometimes you can jump over them, and standing 1 block away is pretty safe, but running underneath feels more like a gut check than a skill check. Thankfully, they're hard countered by a fire flower. That covers basically every challenge you could throw at a player with these mechanics, and it's an impressive roster for an NES game. The game's power-ups are mostly self-explanatory. The mushroom makes you bigger, which can be an interesting trade-off in 1-2 for example, where Big Mario has to either time a crouch slide or slowly break blocks to progress, and Small Mario can just run right through. The main use for the mushroom is giving you a mistake budget, although it doubles the size of your hitbox, so there's another trade-off. The whole impetus for this video was a small incidental detail I noticed in the star power-up, which makes you invincible for a while. I'd never given any thought to when it expired, and just gave myself a very safe margin to avoid damage. There are actually 3 staggered warnings for the Starman running out. The strobing colors slow down, then the song ends, and then the invincibility runs out after a bar or so of the regular music. Another great, well-considered thing that I had never noticed before. For a game that had to invent a bunch of level design conventions and fit 32 courses on an NES cartridge, Super Mario Bros. Is shockingly good. You can't scroll the screen backwards in SMB1, and that forces the game into being a series of linear segments. Since running is so much fun, I think that's a good restriction. Even the immaculate Mario 3 has the occasional maze level that just wastes a bunch of your time. The technical limits, you'll notice the screen never scrolls vertically, create a tight focus on interesting single screens that are sequenced as an escalating challenge. 3.3 is a perfect example of this, introducing various kinds of moving platforms, then combining them in a couple different ways, and then it's over, short and sweet. 5.2 is similar, first showing you a hammer brother, teaching you to kill one with a block, and then presenting 2 of them. With some exceptions, the levels are built to make a clean run possible, but never trivial. Really, the only thing I can take issue with is the repeating maze designs in some of the castles. They behave a bit like secrets, insofar as you have to notice the level is repeating, but secrets give you something good when you find them. These repeating segments just bar progress, and the only challenge is memorizing or writing down paths you've already taken. They're kind of a nothing feature, they just eat some time until you memorize the route. Nintendo loves cannibalizing its own ideas, good and bad, and these mazes appear in many 2D Mario games. Other standout levels are the Fish Bridge, which I believe is guaranteed safe if you never stop running, the Lakitu levels, which are really fun to execute on, and the final 2. Once you learn how to move, SMB1 has a pretty gentle difficulty curve until World 7 or 8, depending on who you ask. 8.3 is full of Hammer Brothers and has a special background as you approach the final castle. 8.4 is another maze, but I actually managed to absorb the route through speedruns, so it's all good for me. Adding a water section here and separating rooms with pipes makes this castle feel quite large, while the other castles are just straight lines. So I can confirm this game is still good. Obviously this topic was kind of a comfort pick, but I always love to give games I enjoy a closer look, even if literally everyone else has already done so. I don't really know what I'm looking for when I look back at these old games. A couple Christmases ago I played SMB1 once or twice a day for the entire month of December. It's more than a decade older than I am, and my only exposure to it as a kid was getting stuck around 1.4 on the Wii Virtual Console and giving up. There's no nostalgia here, but that more elemental form of game design, shaped by processing and memory limits, and the creativity those bred, is extremely appealing to me. By necessity, the best old games focused on doing a few things perfectly. We're kinda spoiled for games like that right now. I'm not the biggest fan of UFO 50's catalog as a player, but it is 50 games for anyone who wants a more focused experience, and if there's ever been an objective game of the year, I think it has to be UFO 50. Balatro also breeds creativity from a pretty limited set of cards. I used to think you needed full random roguelikes, or Binding of Isaac's endlessly tailored synergies to make this sort of game fun. I was completely wrong. But I can't stop thinking about the AAA lineage, and I guess the Game Awards put into perspective how fucked the larger games industry is. At the end of my Diablo 4 video, I said I was done playing AAA games. And I meant it, but I went ahead and played a couple more anyway. The Silent Hill 2 remake was really indicative of how poisoned the culture around games is. From the idiotic backlash about the character designs, to the almost unanimous praise the game received for being a nightmare golem of AAA trends hastily covered in the skin of an influential video game. Playing the remake, fully expecting a masterpiece, would have been one of the most depressing experiences I've ever had with a game, if not for the friend I played it with. It's like they just plugged Unreal Engine into a stock ticker and let market forces direct the game. It has a recognizable name because originality is a risk. It's way too long because games have to be long because games are $90. It plays like the Resident Evil remakes because those made money. It has awful, thoughtless, sub-God of War melee combat because that's part of the package now. I have to wonder if anyone who thinks the real Silent Hill games are irredeemably clunky played them for more than 5 minutes. Because jumping into Silent Hill 3 after beating SH2 Remake, I deeply appreciated how responsive the character rig was, and how the simpler graphics make room for details like bloody footprints. It's almost like fiction is better when it focuses on significant details, instead of just cramming as many details as possible. By the way, why don't they ever eat or go to the bathroom in movies? It's really unrealistic. Then the Game Awards rolled around. And watching all these aging video game celebrities and regular celebrities pick their way across the stage to integrate the new product and then rush through an award no one in attendance cares about felt really apocalyptic, even more than their past shows. And all this amid a plague of layoffs. E3 was constantly falling apart at the seams, and that hinted at the humanity of everyone involved. Frequent mistakes and baffling choices always made the event memorable and fun, regardless of the games on display. The Game Awards are total, highly scripted and controlled, and like SH2 Remake, they're indicative of how risk-averse and uninteresting the games industry's become as it turns into a serious business, capital S, capital B. Just look at their Game of the Year, a celebration of Sony's marketing department that gleefully picks through the scat of one of the best studios of all time, a studio Sony killed and restructured into Asobi, who are cursed to forever make games about how cool the PlayStation controller is. I'm sure Astrobot is a good video game if you ignore all context, but I just don't think I could stomach it. And I don't have a PS5, why would anyone get a PS5? Once upon a time, Super Mario Bros. Was the future, because it was the most fun you could buy. In unfurling levels into scrolling worlds, it may have toppled a domino that led to the Silent Hill 2 remake. It's hard to take lessons from such a simple game, especially one as iconic as Super Mario Bros. But I guess what I enjoy about it is how thoughtful all the choices were. In reinventing the 2D platformer, there were no conventions to lazily copy, so it ends up being a game from a particular place and time, a game that created the myth of Miyamoto. Almost 40 years on, AAA is a Katamari ball of these conventions, just included in games because they're around, and never in a coherent way. And if you want that competent video game, you have to somehow ignore that all the coins are sponsored by Raytheon now. I wish people would be a little more restrained with the word slop, because it's gonna burn itself out too quickly. I used to prefer slurry because it has septic connotations, but slop lacks any hidden moral judgments. It's just slop, and this has been a year of slop, probably the start of a sloppin' age. AI has continued the march to replace every entry-level designer and artist job in the world, and it's quickly been shuffled into every tech product to no one's benefit. AI chat summaries so you don't have to read the chat, AI video summaries so you don't have to watch the video you wanted to watch. In a very literal way, AI produces slop. It decimates its training data and spits it back out in various combinations. What really scares me about AI, and this is too vibes-based to fit in the other video, is that people with the skills to actually write good code or synthesize research might become scarce as students get through school on AI-generated work and enter AI-driven workplaces. It's the flip side of replacing thousands of workers with an enterprise ChatGPT subscription. Everything gets sloppier. While the designers lose the eye to see it, the programmers lose the ability to make it performant, and the scientist loses the ability to formulate questions. On top of that, if my formative experiences as a computer enthusiast were just discussing Python with a customer service bot, I'd probably get into hiking or something. Time and time again, it feels like the end of everything. I'm not quite self-centered enough to really believe that it's over, but I don't think there's any popular sense that things are gonna slowly improve over time. At least not on their own. Maybe that's a good thing in the long term. But World War III is not out of the question either, considering the logic of genocide is playing itself out in Palestine and already overflowing to their neighbors. It's bleak. And I don't have the answers. Here and now, it's Christmas. Hopefully you're with people you love and not on the computer too much. If you're alone, then please treat yourself well. Hope you're looking forward to more videos in the new year. I'm trying not to spend so much time in my own head, and I'd rather release an imperfect video than abandon a bunch of them. That's where I've been. And even if the review never comes out, please try Void Stranger. I guarantee you have never seen anything like it. I have 3 scripts in pretty good shape right now, and one of them is a political thing with some twists and turns, so big things coming. I'll see you in 2025. Video's over, and thanks for watching as always.